All right, let's get started. Could somebody just pull the door there for me? So everybody's here about project management, right? Communication? All right. My name's Matthew Saunders. I'm Vice President of Project Management at Design Group. I'm also a Drupal Association board member. I write on dogstarter.org, which is a blog that I've been writing on for about a decade. And you can find me on D.O as Matthew S, Google Plus, IRC. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @Creech. I've been involved with the Drupal community since about 2007. I moved from being in a nonprofit that built custom PHP MySQL applications at that point to a boutique Drupal shop. And that was after I had gone to a couple of seminars and learned about Drupal and realized that I never wanted to be involved in building another user authentication system ever again. It just seemed like it was the right time. The Drupal community at the time was relatively small. And 2 weeks after I joined that particular shop, I ended up going to Barcelona for DrupalCon, and it completely changed the way I viewed technology and viewed the open source community. It was a remarkable period of time, and it's just gotten better and better and better since 2007. As I said, I work for Atten Design Group, and at Atten Design Group, we're focused on working with companies that do good work around the world, and our core values include a strong desire to affect positive change in the world. To this end, we work with groups like Pointer, the World Bank, World Resources International, the World Bank, Stanford University, Results for Development Institute, groups like that. So if you want a copy of the slides, they're at bit.ly/badcats2013. All right, so we need project management for successful outcomes, and it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about doing something waterfall or agile or cowboy or any of the other project management methodologies out there. If you don't have some kind of planning mechanism in place, things just fall over if the project is of any significant size. So to illustrate this, I put out a call for stories on my blog. I tweeted it, Facebooked it, Google Plused it, and got about 30 or so responses altogether. And I picked 4, which I thought were really just right on the money in terms of illustrating the need for good communication, the need for strong project management. So the first is, I had a client a couple of months ago called me at 6:30 in the morning, yelling and screaming because his site had been down for over an hour. I dragged myself out of bed, get to the computer, and his site comes right up. I told him to try to get to Google. Well, guess what? According to him, Google was down too. I politely told him to call his internet provider because that was what was down, and once the internet came up, to use it to search for a new developer. All right. Was that a smart thing for him to do, though? Like, this is sadly really common. And I think that it illustrates that there's a need for trust and empathy between client and vendor, both internal and external. Because what happened here was a relationship got burned down, and it otherwise may have been a good relationship. We don't know. But often our clients aren't the most technically savvy people, which is the reason that they come to us. Both developers and clients need to be active listeners, and those kinds of rules can be set up at the beginning of an engagement. All right, number 2. I had a project that had multiple decision makers. They wouldn't move forward unless they all agreed on any one point, and they couldn't agree on anything. This is crippling, and it's very common as well. And so when you're working with a new client, it's really important to figure out who the decision maker is and identify a single person that can act as that point of contact, who has the authority to make decisions. Otherwise, projects will go on forever. And you may be in a position where you say, well, I'm going to stop actually billing hours. I'm not going to do work on the project until they make up their mind. But there's overhead involved in extending a project beyond the length of time that you've got it scheduled in your queue. And at some point or another, there's diminishing returns, and it becomes not worth even bothering finishing the project. Not that I'm advocating doing that, but there comes a point when it's costing you money. I met a drunk guy. Yeah, we do that a lot, these things, don't we? Oh, you make sites. Let's make something like Facebook and earn a lot of money. I'll come up with ideas and you make it. You got any suggestions? Yeah, we need something like Facebook so we'll be rich. You go make it. I think it's important to note that there are bad clients. So for the first illustration, it's possible that the client wasn't bad, just clueless. In this, in this particular situation, it's clear that we're talking about a bad client. Because if we knew that we could build something like Facebook and be rich, why would we be developing for other people, right? I had a client who didn't know what they wanted. They spent endless hours in meetings throwing around ideas around. And then despite warnings that they were consuming their contracted hours in this fashion, they insisted that they shouldn't have to pay for the time because the site hadn't been built. How many of you have been in that situation? Right. So this all comes back to process and schedules and expectations for both clients and vendors. I think it's really important that at the beginning of a project, you lay out a timeline for the client and indicate benchmarks that they're responsible, just as you're responsible for delivering things. So if you make an agreement at the beginning of the project that when you deliver some kind of artifact, wireframes, Photoshop files, something like that, and you have an agreement with the client that they're going to turn them around in say 3 business days, you need to keep them to those agreements that you've made with them, and those agreements need to be made up front, because if they're not, there's no way that you can get yourself into a situation where you can set those expectations middle of a project. I'm not sure why that slide's gone twice. All right. So all of this can lead to can occur because of a lack of planning, communication, process, and focus. And one of the biggest things that we don't think about as a group is cultural. There are cultural differences. Even if you're working with an American client, the fact of the matter is that we speak different language than they do. We talk about nodes, and we talk about entities, and we talk about taxonomies and all sorts of things that don't really make a whole lot of sense to a client. So it's really important to be building up a vocabulary, a glossary, which makes sense to that particular client. In fact, when you think about it, we even use different words, the same word for different concepts than other open source projects. For example, a module to somebody who's doing something outside of Drupal means a block. And those kinds of miscommunications can cause all kinds of grief. So you need to be an active listener. You need to explain something and ask them to explain back to you what it is that you've said. So this can make nightmares for us. Our partners, internal, external, they bring us to an open sourced Arkham, and we feel like we're being drawn into an H.P. Lovecraft film. And we look into the darkness and we see the Call of Cthulhu. You might find this familiar. This is the emotional state that you find yourself in when the client is throwing around different contrib modules that you know won't work. The place where a client assumes that something is easy or won't take much time. But that's just never true. The place where you wonder if you're ever going to get a chance to actually build something. And when you realize the project is in a constant state of flux and change is the norm and predictability is evaporated. Our job is to communicate, it's to translate, it's to mediate, it's to unblock and bring calm from chaos. Our job is to make everybody else's job easier. It's to simplify the complex. And if we're being successful, there'll be times when your team says, why do we need project managers? Well, we need to make sure that that people aren't fooled by that sort of state of grace, so to speak. Because we're the cat herders. And I'm not just talking about developers, I'm not just talking about themers, I'm talking about product owners, business owners, and clients. All of them are cats. They're all going to go running in different directions unless you keep your arms around them and ensure that they're going on a straight path. We have to keep the communication running and keep our ducks in a row. And then, above all else, we need to keep our developers from seeing shiny things that make them dart off into different directions. So how many of you have been in the middle of a sprint or development cycle and you've been asked by a client to just add this one little thing? It can't take very much time, and boy, oh boy, it'll make the site perfect. Show of hands? Yeah. And what does that do to your timelines?
Explodes it.
Right, because it's not just one little thing. It's one little thing and another little thing and another little thing and another little thing and another little thing. So it's really important, again, when you're dealing with clients in these circumstances, to have expectations set. It's okay to add things to scope, but they've got to expect to be paying for those things, and they've got to expect that when scope increases, their timelines are going to increase. And again, if this isn't communicated up front before you start the project, there's no way that you're going to be able to change those expectations once the project is started. All this requires strong communication across your working unit, across your company, and with the client. So I've got a question. Who knows why manhole covers are heavy and round? Right. Why are they heavy?
So you don't lift them up.
Exactly. We are manhole covers. Our job is to make sure that people don't fall down these holes and cause our projects to just go off the rails. It behooves us to use really clear communication. And you're hearing me say communication, 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 because at the end of the day, 90% of what we do is communication. We may use tools to facilitate it, but our job is to make sure that people are talking with one another. So it behooves us to use clear communication to prevent ourselves, our clients, our colleagues from falling down these dangerous holes. And it's not just communicating out, it's setting up a space and a framework that allows the team to most effectively communicate with one another as well. It's listening, and it's listening for unspoken messages. You might hear something from a client that sounds like they're agreeing with you 100%, but their understanding is completely the opposite of what they've said to you. Again, it's important to have them repeat what they think they want, and it's important for you to repeat back what they've said to you in your own words, so everybody understands exactly what it is that you're talking about. And this takes time. The biggest problems occur when you're looking at your timeline, you're looking at your day, and you say, you know what, I can only afford 5 minutes to talk to the client. That you're setting yourself up for a world of hurt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about 3 methodologies. I've used all of them in my career since 1995-ish, and I've used them with varying degrees of success. And I've learned from them all about different ways to effectively work with clients. So the first is Cowboy. Cowboy is extremely unpredictable. It can be very, very fast, and it requires a great deal of trust between developers and stakeholders, because it is the number one worst way of having miscommunication. Is everybody familiar with the notion of what Cowboy is? Okay, so you could think of Cowboy as being the ultimate sprint, the ultimate agile process. You're literally doing one-day sprints. You're looking at your problem. You're with a developer. Usually it's 2 people, 3 people in the same room, and you rapidly iterate your product until you've got a working piece of software. You almost never are putting any kind of requirements together other than we want it to do this, you can build things incredibly quickly that way, but they tend to not be very cohesive. It tends to be really good for prototyping, not really great for developing larger pieces of software. the fact of the matter is, in a lot of ways, the Drupal community as a whole operates in a cowboy fashion on little pieces of core or on contributed modules that they need because they a given individual has a certain itch. And that's part of the reason that we have 3-4 year cycles for core to be updated and so forth. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and you can end up with great results, but with clients, So it's highly informal, focuses on stakeholders, and it can be used in unpredictable projects. Great for rapid prototyping. The place where I used this in a very large project was Examiner.com. A number of years ago, I was hired to shepherd the process of moving Examiner from Cold Fusion into Drupal 7, and I didn't know that it was going to be Drupal 7. I thought that we were doing Drupal 6 because Drupal 7 had only been released ahead about 8 weeks earlier. So when you look at the commits for Drupal 7, about 18% of the commits came from the Examiner team because we had things that we had to get done, and they were just cranking on it. So the reason that I ended up having to use Cowboy for Examiner is that when I arrived, I was handed requirements yay big. They'd spent a lot of time with business analysts going through all of what they wanted to have in the site, and my first task was to figure out how long it was going to take. So I sat down with each chunk of the requirements, and I Gantt charted the whole thing out from beginning to end. Because it seemed like I had a perfect waterfall project here. They'd done all the requirements, but they weren't Drupal-y at all. Like they hadn't thought about what Drupal does or doesn't do in any way, shape, or form. So I came back and I said, I got great news. We've got it planned out. It's going to take 18 months. And there was silence in the executive committee's office, just absolute silence. And one of them looks up at me and says, "You've got 7." And I said, "Oh, well, then we need to take these and put them into the circular file cabinet. And you guys got to trust me. You got to trust me that the team that we put together can build what you need, but it's not going to be what you expect." And we went into 2-3 day development cycles using the wireframes that we had and the comps. And we said, you know what, that's going to be a node queue. That's the only way that we're going to be able to make this work. That's going to, and we just banged through it. And we delivered in 7 months. There were a lot of frayed nerves at the end of it. Not just the development team, but the executive committee, because they felt like they had no control over anything that was going on. And it's true, they didn't have any control. What that ended up being was it also included a migration of 7 million nodes across multiple media types, 200,000 users at the time, and we had to make this thing stand up to something like 3.5 million unique users a day. So it was not a simple process. Now we did have a great team for it, but we had to. The only way to do it was by operating in a more cowboy way. So the other methodology that I've used a fair bit is Waterfall. And Waterfall sacrifices speed for predictability. It's a lot slower because you define everything up front, and it's great for companies that don't have a whole lot of tolerance for risk, but it does mean that you're doing a whole lot up front. The work that I did with the Western States Arts Federation, building custom PHP MySQL applications, there we almost always used Waterfall as our methodology. Who's worked with Waterfall? Okay, and I have a question for you all. Have you ever had a fixed scope stay fixed? No? Anybody? Come on. Just one person? No? Okay. That's right, because Waterfall doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. It's a pipe dream. You're always going to have changes in the middle of a project. It does not matter whether you've got very defined requirements. People are going to change their minds. So what I suggest to you is that you embrace that. You don't fight against it because it's going to happen. And blood pressure can rise when you're sitting there thinking to myself, my goodness, I just finished working with the team and we built this piece of functionality and they want something different now. Embrace it. It's okay. Just make sure that up front in your contracts, it's very clear, change orders cost money and time. The other problem with Waterfall is that it tends to turn developers into order takers rather than creative beings, and they don't like that. And you can find yourself in a situation very easily where you have developers leaving your shop because they simply want. I mean, coding is creative. It's a kind of art form, and when you're told to do things in one exact way, people tend to push away from that. So what can happen is you can start to feel like you're going over the waterfall and rocketing forward all at the same time, particularly if a client is feeling like, wait a second, I want you to start building. Why are you planning everything up front? So you end up feeling like you're losing control in those situations. And the worst thing that you can possibly do if you're trying to do things largely waterfall is to push into development before all of those are done. So then we've got Agile. Agile requires that we weave, that we move, that we're flexible. And contrary to what people think, there's a great deal of predictability, but the predictability is within defined sprints. And those sprints could be 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, but there's a great deal of predictability at that point. So what we're talking about is defined time boxes. A time box is a set period of time where you're saying we're going to build this chunk of functionality in this period of time, and it's going to work at the end. It tends to be iterative, so you build something and then you see how it works and you iterate on it. You make changes, and it gets better and better and better, presumably. It's incremental and it's collaborative. So it really requires everybody who's on the team to be interacting with one another and talking about what the solutions are going to be. It can be rapid and flexible, and it is responsive to change, which often is really good for clients. And teams tend to self-organize. So what I want to spend the rest of the talking about is the fact that I threw all of that away years ago, all of those methodologies, and realized that none of them in the pure form actually work. So we talked about Cowboy, which is fast, causes problems with expectation gaps between business and team. It's volatile. There's not much predictability. We talked about Waterfall, which is slow, change is inevitable, often in the middle of a project. Requirements often fight what we're trying to build in Drupal. And there's lots of dictating to the development teams. Developers can become order takers, not active participants. So let's talk about taking the two of them and squishing them together. So when things aren't working right, teams are fractured and they cease to work as a cohesive unit. There's no traction, there's a lack of trust, and there's frustration amongst different departments. So yeah, does that sort of resonate with you folks? Yeah, I love that slide. So one of the things that I've discovered across a number of shops that I've worked with is that when you're building a new process, particularly a hybrid process that takes elements of Agile and elements of Waterfall, it's really important that the whole team be involved in those decisions. If you don't have the whole team involved, you don't have buy-in from the team. So it's critical that people bring their input, bring their expertise to the table, and they give their input as you're adjusting. And these are cultural changes we're talking about. They're not easy. When we made this kind of cultural change at Examiner, it took a year, and it was tough. There were times when people were at each other's throats. Some shops have been easier than others when I've helped to engage in these kinds of change. Like Atten right now where I'm working, it seems like it's being embraced. People were ready for it, and that's going on along incredibly well. But it is a cultural shift, so be aware of that when you're trying to make these kinds of changes. So our job as project managers is to set up this framework and then allow the team to organically build upon that framework to support their own unique needs. In the book Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about planes that were falling out of the sky in the 1990s. And there didn't appear to be any kind of reason for it. The instrumentation was working correctly. There wasn't bad weather, but there was an inordinately high percentage of planes that were falling out of the sky. Does anybody have a sense of why that was happening? So the reason that was happening is that there was a hierarchical rules of social hierarchy that were in place in terms of communication. First officers and engineers didn't feel like they could bring up problems with the pilot, with the captain, because the hierarchy had been set up in such a way that it was absolutely rigid. And if you said something to the pilot that was against what they were appearing to be doing, the decisions that they were making, it could cause a whole lot of problems. Because they weren't at ease to speak directly with their captains about concerns, planes fell out of the sky. One of the strengths of Agile, which is one of the elements that I found is really helpful to maintain, is the fact that you're talking about a flat group. Everybody has a say. The stakeholders have a say. Developers have a say. The project manager does. Themers do. Everybody talks collaboratively about how to solve a problem. So one of your jobs is to set up a methodology whereby the entire team feels like they do have permission to give input, and that nobody can say your idea is wrong. So via scrums, war rooms, retrospectives, you keep that communication running, and then the culture that you're creating, you want to eliminate blame. You want people to be able to own their mistakes. And you want people to ask for feedback. All of this requires people to learn how to listen. Sometimes that's hard. Our teams, if they're flat, if they're not flat, can make a lot of mistakes, like the pilots, like the planes that were falling out of the sky. So, but that doesn't mean that our roles aren't defined. So let's talk a little bit about different roles that people might have on one of these teams. So we have the project manager. And the project manager acts as a scrum master. Is everybody familiar with the notion of scrum? What a scrum is? Anybody not? So a scrum is a very short meeting where you sit down with your team and you say, okay, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And do you have any blockers? Those meetings shouldn't last more than 15 minutes. The idea is just to get a sense of what everybody on the team is doing. The Scrum Master keeps the meeting moving along. So if a developer and a themer go off on a tangent and it looks like they're going to talk for 20 minutes, you say, no. You take this out of this meeting when we're done, and you solve your problem outside of the meeting. Project managers typically lead pointing. In traditional Agile, you don't break up things into hours. You have the notion of points, and points are an indicator of time, but also difficulty of a given task. I've got a spreadsheet that I use for pointing projects, and I personally have taken the notion that nothing takes less than a half day. So a point for me is 4 hours. There are lots of great books on pointing strategies, but that's just a simple way of dealing with it. So when we're in meetings where we're talking about how much time a project is going to take, I'll always be saying that we can't do a half hour. Nothing takes less than 4 hours. Our job is to provide defense from distractions. We talked about that a little bit. And helping the team avoid mistakes. We also manage schedules. So then you've got product UX people. people who build artifacts like wireframes and sometimes Photoshop files, content maps, those kinds of things. They act as a communication conduit between business and development groups, and they're responsible for things like backlog, personas, epics, and stories. Are folks familiar with the idea of personas, epics, and stories? Okay. They clarify business needs when they're confusing. They do demonstrations of the software when the software is done at the end of a sprint. And we've got developers. The developers take the stories that they're given for a given sprint, and they self-organize them. They're the ones that are doing the work, so they should have the right to organize those stories in any way that they want. They communicate expectations of what can or can't be completed in a sprint. There's nothing worse, nothing more demoralizing for a developer than to be given way more work during a period of time than they can possibly complete. And it's really common. It happens a lot. They define how business needs should be architected and executed. So us as project managers shouldn't be saying, you build it like this. They should have the right to look at the problem and, with their experience, architect a solution that's going to work. And then they have to execute. And if they don't, well, then that's another conversation, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about a sprint model and how I've broken up projects in the past. The one that we're going to look at assumes a 20-day sprint. It could as easily be a 5-day sprint, a 10-day sprint, a 20-day sprint, 30-day sprint, or 40-day sprint. But I'm just going to use a 20-day sprint because it roughly matches a month. So there is the idea of 20, 40, 60-day overlap when you're talking about sprints like this. The current 20 is what we're doing right now, what we're building right now. And while we're building, the overlap would be the UX team. And what they're doing at that point is building the artifacts for the next sprint, the user stories, the wireframes, the Photoshop files, all those good things. And 60 days out, the stakeholders should be thinking about their business needs and figuring out what it is that they want to have built. By breaking it down like this and being very, very disciplined about it, you get into these really, really smooth cycles where you're able to execute on chunks of functionality and not feel rushed for feedback from stakeholders, and where the UX team has sufficient time to actually do what they need to do. So the development sprint might look like this. So we've got a couple of days at the beginning, which are planning. So you've got your user stories, you've got your artifacts, and you get together and you sit down and you look through them all together and you start planning out how you're going to execute on those particular needs. Then you go into coding, and in this example, we do day 3 through day 12 for coding. And during that period of time, it's critical for us to make sure that the developers aren't experiencing context switching, that they're not being pulled off of what they're working on to go work on something else. Developers need a solid 4 hours a day where they're not being disturbed by other things to actually get work done efficiently, and they shouldn't be bopping through between multiple projects. At Atten, we've broken up teams now, so we've got small teams, and each small team is responsible for one project and one project only. And that's greatly improved our ability to effectively deliver projects. And then we get into a team testing period of time where the entire team, everybody who's involved with it, the product people, the developers, the themers, the stakeholders, everybody's working together to test and rapidly fix things that need to be fixed. Then we get to the final day, which is a deployment day. That might just be to a development server for people to be able to see things in the larger or rather a staging server in the larger company if it's a project that's going on for many, many sprints, or it might be, if it's an existing project, deploying that code to the production environment. And then at the very end, we have a demo and a retrospective. And those are really important. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the idea for the demo is that everybody gets together and celebrates the code that's been written. They see how it works. And the retrospective is where you look back at the sprint and say what went well, what didn't go well. So then at the same time, the product creative timeline is broken up similarly. We have them in that blue area engaging in story creation, wireframes, and so forth. And then days 13 through 18, they're explaining what they did and why they did it, and making changes as they need to. So then what you end up with is a nice solid block of good user stories and artifacts to go along with those user stories. And then again, at the very end, at the same time as we're doing deployment, we're locking down our time box. At that point, you don't want things to shift. You want your predictability for that next month. And if a client says, I want you to change this, again, in your contracts, you really need to have something that indicates what the ramifications are of making changes in the middle of time box. They can make all the decisions they want for future time boxes, make all the changes that they want for future time boxes, but once you lock it down, it should stay locked down and you should execute on that. So what I like to do, and this is what the calendar might look like when you've got the overlapping sprints sitting on top of one another. So what I like to do is take deliverables and put them into the Google Calendar and give day notifications and assign those notifications to the development team. So a day before something's due, they get pinged in their calendar. It's a little bit extra work. At Examiner, it works really, really well. And in some cases, you can do it a little bit differently. If you're using a ticketing system that can do alerts, you can do that as well. But having something set up so you don't have to think about those pings is really helpful. So on the last day of the time box, we do a company-wide demonstration. You talk about what you've built, and the reason that you do that is so the entire company and your stakeholders and so forth know what the status is of the project. It builds respect amongst the team because everybody can see what the cool things that have been built. And it also puts us in a position where everybody really knows how to use that new piece of functionality, that piece of software. Or if they don't really know how to use it, they at least know who to talk to about how to make use of it. Directly after the demo, the production team should really hold a retrospective. And people find this really uncomfortable to begin with, but it quickly becomes like therapy. The idea is that you have created a safe environment where everybody feels free to state their own opinions about what went well, what didn't go well. It's really important that environment is set up in such a way that people don't feel attacked when you're going through the retrospective. But just like Agile has you doing iterations on software, we should be doing iterations on our process so that the process changes never end. You just make it a little bit better each cycle. What worked, what didn't work, and why not? Then it's the project manager's job to be accountable for changes in the process that the team has decided collectively that they're going to engage in. So we talked a little bit about earlier, a little bit about Scrum, the idea that you have meetings every day, 15 minutes or less. What did you do? What are you going to do? What are your blockers? Okay, you and you get together, fix your blocker, and leave it at that. Really great reason for Scrum is just to make sure everybody is on the same page as to where we are in a given sprint, and to figure out if we're in trouble. If people don't talk, if they're not given the opportunity to talk, we do get in trouble, and people will take a tangent that isn't necessarily the right route to go. It is really hot in here. We also should be having client check-ins. Oh, Thank you. We should also be doing client check-ins, and a client check-in once a week is probably sufficient. But don't skip them, because when clients don't hear from you, they get scared. They imagine all sorts of bad things, and that leads to clients who start to micromanage, and then you're going down a spiral that is just absolutely grim. So make sure that you set a client check-in once a week. It doesn't need to be more than 15 minutes either. Just let them know what you're up to, where you are on their project. It greases the wheels so incredibly well. So what if you've got lots? I mean, this works great if you're working on one big project. But what if you've got lots of little projects, and you're trying to juggle those little projects? What if your timelines get disrupted because of immediate needs? You really shouldn't throw this baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. What you should be doing is looking at how you can adjust the lengths of your sprints to handle those kinds of eventualities. For example, at Examiner, we did 4-week sprints. We decided those were too long, pulled them down to 2-week sprints. At Atten, we're doing 1-week sprints because we've got all sorts of priorities that there's tensions there. And part of that is that the project team at any given time is working on 2, 3, or 4 projects, and then our support team have 25, 26 clients, something like that, and they're approaching in their small teams a block of clients as being a project and planning out their sprints using that block of clients. So what this here is a spreadsheet that I like to use, and what we've got is all the projects that you're working on, and then the priorities of the projects from 1 to n, and then the percentage of time that you're going to apply to any one of them. I set it up in such a way that I can first figure out what my burn rate is, and we'll look at that in just a second. And that's the burn rate right down there. And as you change the hours, it changes the percentages. So ultimately, you know, okay, I've got 325 hours. All of my hours are accounted for in this given sprint. And by the way, don't schedule people 100%. It doesn't work. So across the top there, you see that we've got developers. We've got a lead, and the lead has lead efforts, which are just kind of organizational things. You'll see the developers don't have that. And when you put your total hours in, let's say somebody's taking vacation, this spreadsheet will reduce the efforts by the exact same amount of time percentage-wise across the board. Again, the idea is that number matches the original number that we were looking at. So then you get a sense of what the burn rate is for each one of your team members. Which brings us to this spreadsheet, which again has all of their projects, and then you assign to each member of the group the percentage that they're going to work on a given project, and then over here there's another number which should match the other two spreadsheets. What you're seeing here is that just got moved to 100%. And this is assuming that developers have a 30 hour development week. This allows you to in a given sprint to say, okay, I'm at 100% now. This is the total number of hours. This is the actual amount of work that I can get completed on a given project, and then you can base your sprint plan on those number of hours. Okay, toolbox. All of this is great, and processes ought not require to be tool specific, but there are some tools that I've found that have been really useful. First of all, we use IRC, Skype, and HipChat at Atten. We're moving away from IRC right now in favor of HipChat, which is an Atlassian product, which will do things like ping your email when you're mentioned in a room, The log is automatically updated when you log into the room, so you can scroll back right there. You don't have to go to, say, a bot log. When we're using IRC, we do use Morbus ifs bot. Is everybody familiar with the bot? Does everybody use IRC? No. So IRC is a chat space that's been around since the 80s, and it allows people to communicate by text. And almost all the developers you'll ever work with spend their lives in IRC. So when you're trying to communicate with this group, communicate in the place that they're comfortable communicating, and one of those places is IRC. One of the reasons that we use Skype is because you can also do video that way. We've highly shifted also to Google Hangouts, which are useful in that manner as well. We use Google Docs, or at least I have in the past. In this case, this is a sprint. It's got story ID, priority, where it lives, its story, notes, feedback, comp, timing, ticket number, level of effort, lead developer, theme, or QA product. And then the colors represent where we are in the sprint. So if it's green, it means it's done, it's ready to be tested. If it's yellow, it's being worked on. If it's white, yes?
I have a quick question. At my company, we've tried Google Docs and we've tried Asana.
Yeah.
Have you guys tried Asana over there, and what do you think of it?
I prefer Jira with Greenhopper to Asana. And that's what we use. As our ticketing system. The Google Doc is really to have a single place where you can get a quick glance. Okay.
Yeah, no, we use Jira as a ticketing system
Yeah.
in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
getting a task list mapped out for
Yeah.
the team. We've had some luck with Asana, but we used Google Docs before, and so people tend to still prefer
Yeah. Yeah. Asana's fine. I like. There are other tools that I like better.
Along those lines, did you look at WorkMajig or any of those packages that do a lot of the resource allocation, shifting, offsetting, management like that?
Yeah. We use a piece of software called Float, which allows you to do some of that. Again, I tend to find myself going back to spreadsheets. I don't know why, but I tend to find myself going back to spreadsheets. And maybe it's because I've been at this since, forever, and that's where all of my project management started. But for things like this, I tend to use a spreadsheet. And also because often these ticketing systems will allow you to do an export of your sprint into an XLS file, a CSV. And that makes it dead easy to throw in the colors and so forth. And that way you're looking at something. I'm a visual person. So when I'm looking at a spreadsheet and I see green, 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 yellow, 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 pink, I know to look at that pink item. And I'll go back to the ticket queue and figure out who it is that is having the problem and why they're having the problem. It's harder to do that when you're looking at a ticket queue. So that's one of the reasons I like using spreadsheets. So right now at Atten, we use Jira with Greenhopper, with new Basecamp for client communication, and then Harvest for time tracking. Harvest is apparently, yeah.
Sorry, I love Harvest.
Yeah, Harvest is great. And Harvest is about to release a plugin for the hosted version of Jira that will allow you to do your time tracking directly on the ticket itself.
Sorry, one more plug. It's also linked with Asana.
Yeah.
I don't work there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that we're doing it is using Harvest right now is because Harvest integrates with new Basecamp. So we've got a list of deliverables, and you're putting your time against those deliverables in new Basecamp. So what I'm suggesting to you all is go back to your companies, start to talk about process, and start to talk about how you can make your process great. Because what you're going to find is as you play with different elements of different project management methodologies, you're going to become faster, better, and more awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Where do you say the slides were again?
They are at bit.ly/BADCats 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
when you were talking about the waterfall approach, you mentioned how it's always going to, you're always going to have changes.
Yep.
You're always going to encounter that. You said to be flexible. How do you, with your hybrid approach, how do you build in that flexibility? How do you,
Yeah.
maybe you're not dedicated to doing, a full Scrum, full Agile approach.
Right.
So you gotta have this hybrid. How do you build in that flexibility?
So the flexibility gets built in by, first of all, changing your mindset and saying, I'm embracing change. When change occurs, I'm not going to fight it. But you also integrate that into your contracts with your clients. And when you're doing kickoff meetings at the very beginning of a project, you make it really clear what changes mean, and that they're not bad. In fact, they're often good. And they should be encouraged to think about what we're building for them, and encourage them to be creative, but also recognizing their implications, especially if you're working in a shop that does their projects fixed bid, right? If you suddenly get changes in the middle of a project, it can explode that project in such a way that you're not making any money, and that's no good.
Yeah, I think the mindset is important because I've often found it turns into this kind of antagonistic thing.
Absolutely.
Where we say, sure, we can do that, but
Yeah.
here's this change order. We kind of try to discourage it.
Right. So the way I approach it is I say, wow, that is a terrific idea, and we should explore this more. Let's look at our timeline, and let's look at our budget, and let's figure out how we fit it in. That's an amazing idea. So always approach it positively, not
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, you want them to be excited. I mean, you want change orders, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's more money coming into your pocket. You want them to be excited about paying you more money. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say what we end up doing. I'm a technical team lead and manager, so I end up interfacing with product owners a lot, and getting those requests. Like, hey, can we? Is oftentimes there's a lot of stuff in there. It's a great big idea. There's one real nugget in there that could be super useful, and it probably won't be that hard to implement.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right, and that's the real priority, and the rest of it's just sort of the fluff that can come in a V2 or V3.
Sure.
So really, it's just a matter of being like, yeah, absolutely, let's talk about it, and in that discussion, find out what that nugget is, and the real reason they need it, and the real business case behind that core piece of functionality they want. Pull that out, prioritize it, and say, okay, we'll get this in sooner than later. Like, put that in. Then all the fluff around it becomes additional work later on.
BADCamp.
Right, and if you're a consulting house, that gives you further business down the road because you built the core. Now later on, you're going to get the stuff that makes them really happy, right? And it gives you additional work later in a maintenance cycle or whatever happens. So you'll fulfill like what some of their core needs, with at the same time saying no to stuff that will just blow everything up to smithereens and try to ram it in fast. So it's gently but firmly saying yes and moving on.
And then it's hard because sometimes it takes a developer or some like technical minded person to pick out that core. Pick out that seed from what it is.
Yes, exactly. Well, which sort of helps because I'm technical. I'm a developer originally by trade.
Just like that.
Yeah. Or maybe have a developer who can just shut up and not talk sitting on those and later.
Yes. Capital B A D.
Reviews
Yeah.
Okay. This stuff
And
is
a
what
capital C.
needs to happen with all of it. Like, let's get back to the,
Oh,
That's
cool.
kind of what we're actually trying to think about now is how to sort of bring a developer. I'm actually a developer, not a PM.
yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to
Yeah.
approach a developer
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
communication
I recorded that.
with,
I did.
along with the PM.